We here at Tab 4 have been talking about regulatory change for the last 3 years. Whether it's in Washington or in Brussels, how the regulators are approaching regulatory reform is a major topic of concern for both institutional traders and the markets as a whole. I'm joined today by Jeffrey Wallace, Managing Partner at SunGard's Consulting Services, and I want to talk to you, Jeffrey, about how the markets are reacting to this regulatory environment that we see ourselves in.
Well, Alex, I mean, the interesting thing about the regulatory discussion right now is that we have this middle ground that's actually emerging. When you talk to the organizations that we deal with on a daily basis, over the last 3 years, they've spent 40 to 70% of their initiative budget on regulatory concerns, addressing the regulatory compliance agenda that they've been given. And when you look at the impacts of that, that has stunted so many areas of growth in innovation, in transformation, and just getting on with the business transformation and business objectives that they need to accomplish to service their customers. So we see at SunGard this middle ground that the regulators are providing, which is really creating this stagnation. So we often talk about the decision that they need to make. Do they actually really lead? Do they actually take a much more aggressive front and actually step forward and drive the agenda and help the market really kind of transform according to the regulatory agenda they put forth? Or do they take a step back and let the market sort out some of its own needs around the regulatory framework they provide? But this middle ground is creating a lot of consternation and a lot of problems, and it's creating outside threats in the industry.
Well, it's interesting you talk about outside threats. I mean, the folks in the markets are spending a lot of money to try to keep on top of Dodd-Frank, of Basel III, all these types of regulatory interventionist activities. We've had people here say that the regulators have to take a more sort of stringent position in the markets, but it sounds like what you're hearing is stringent, not stringent, active, inactive. Make a decision and do it. Either lead, follow, or get the hell out of the way.
Well, we want to react. We want to know what the uncertainty is going to be. We've dealt with uncertainty for so long, and this uncertainty is creating this problem that we're dealing with. And once we know what the agenda is going to be, once we have some clear direction, we can then go about our business and get on with it. Right now, we have no way of knowing how to really address the technology needs and operational needs going forward because our business models are sort of in between because we're not sure how to address the regulator concerns. So we really want to advocate making a decision and allowing the industry then to react to that and drive its own agenda. The outside threats, the outside pressures are going to continue to mount if we don't get on top of this change.
Where do you see the outside pressures coming from? Are they coming from other sectors in the U.S. economy? Are they coming from other elements, other elements within the financial services sector? China, Brazil, sort of Singapore, Hong Kong?
Well, I think there's both. I think there's aspects of the U.S. economy that will bring in outside threats. If you look at the technology companies that are out there providing new disruptive ideas around technology and the uses of technology, particularly with the algorithmic use of operations, that creates an outside threat that could transform the back offices of the investment banks today. Also, when you look at emerging markets, they don't have the legacy assets that cause the cost problem that we see in the more westernized investment banks. And this nimbleness, this lack of cost overlay that they don't have allows them to actually be more aggressive and actually attract more capital and attract more investment going forward.
When we look at some of the hard decisions that operational managers are making in today's market, trying to remove excess cost layers, what are you seeing with your clients? How are they approaching this problem, and what are the challenges that they're facing?
Well, they're faced with some really, really tough decisions. It is not easy to remove the legacy environments that we've built over the last 20 years. And when you're able to do some of it, you still have some of the residual effects that are left over. You may cut off part of the system, but then there's some piece of it that continues to exist for a period of time. And all that's happening in these investment banks is the cost is really then reallocated across other areas.
You've got lines of businesses who are making hard operational decisions to cut costs, impact sort of their bottom line, with the idea being if I can reduce these allocations, I can increase my profitability. But what you're in actuality seeing is these institutions make the hard choices, but because of these legacy infrastructures, whether they be cost mechanics, they're getting an outsized portion of those expenses still.
Right. The allocation model is continuing to grow, and this is just continuing to drain the system. And when you really get down to it, whoever the last man standing is going to be bearing the entire 100%
of the cost. Absolutely.
And that in and of itself is a scary proposition for the industry, and one that we really have to understand and address and really go after and attack.
And for me, that means that sort of newer players, more innovative players who have not had these sort of outdated business models are probably in a better position to do better in today's market or tomorrow's market.
Well, they're obviously more nimble. One, they can apply newer technologies faster, and they don't have this this kind of system built around legacy that actually constrains them. So they're much more nimble. This is going to be an outside threat. These are threats. They're new entrants to the marketplace that can bring in disruption that we've never even thought of yet. And so that is a real reality to the system. We all know that the margins are going to continue to compress in this environment. We know that we're going to continue to have to provide the same level of services that we've enjoyed over the last couple of years. But the reality is we have to do it in a different way through different technologies that are much more cost effective and with operations that are much less people intensive and much more technology intensive.
Sounds like bold leadership is needed within the industry, especially when you start talking about innovation. Folks have got to be able to make the hard decisions. They have to make the big decisions. They just can't carry on doing the same thing over and over and expecting a different outcome.
Absolutely, and I don't think the status quo is going to exist much longer. And if we don't start to rethink how our models are built, how we actually look at our day-to-day interactions amongst firms, amongst the trading partners that we have, and then how does that relate to the underlying technology and operations and ultimately the cost required to support that, we're going to be looking at other people that are leading rather than being the leaders ourselves.
Well, Jeffrey, thank you very much. I really appreciate taking the time to visit and speak with us today at the TAB Forum. I really do believe that the regulators have got to make a real hard decision on what they want to do and then execute on that, and I think the markets as a whole will then start moving again.
Well, thank you, and we think it's very important that they start to make some decisions for us all.